So welcome back to another episode of Sci-fi Pol Sci. So today we're going to be talking about the rule of two. I know I've done a lot of Star Wars ones, but there's a lot of interesting philosophy and political thought within Star Wars that's kind of just beneath the surface. And some writers really fleshed it out, like in particular the Darth Bane trilogy and Darth Plagueis really kind of flushed out a lot of interesting concepts about the Sith and made them go beyond just kind of normal villains. So before we can talk about the rule of two, we have to talk about the Brotherhood of Darkness. Now, I talked about them in a previous video, but we're just going to go briefly over it. By the way, in reference to that video, there is a very good real-world example of a system like the Brotherhood of Darkness, the Szlachta, the Polish nobility of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, in which more or less all the nobility were equal. The various nobles had similar power, they all had the veto. So that was kind of similar. Also, China operates kind of as that. So the Brotherhood of Darkness, of course, came about during the Dark Age of the Republic, in which a resurgent Sith Empire had more or less destroyed the Republic, but then collapsed into infighting, and the galaxy more or less just became anarchic. Eventually what happened is a former Jedi named Khan, I think his name is Skir Khan, he's named after Shao Kahn from the Jungle Book, came to power, and during he formed the Brotherhood of Darkness. Now the Brotherhood of Darkness actually banned the title Darth, and everybody who became a full Sith took the title Dark Lord of the Sith, so there were dozens of Dark Lords of the Sith. And they ended a lot of practices, like Sith weren't supposed to kill other Sith, the Academy no longer encouraged murder, pupils were no longer expected to kill their masters, kind of sane reforms like that. So the Sith were able to raise armies as big as the Jedi, because there's a similar number of dark side adepts as there are light side adepts. The dark side adepts just aren't as easy to detect, I don't think, but regardless. So what wound up happening is Darth Bane was an acolyte, but he found the Brotherhood of Darkness had betrayed the spirit of the dark side, and he actually went to the Rataka, however you pronounce it, homeworld where the Starforge is, and he found a holocron of Darth Revan. So he was kind of meditating on why the Sith kept losing to the Jedi. So his observations were in the old Sith Empire, where there was many Sith Lords, what would tend to happen is Sith Lords would have their power bases consisting of lesser Sith Lords. Sorry, the Darths would have their power bases consisting of lesser Sith Lords, just Lords, not Dark Lords of the Sith. There would be Sith Warriors, Sith Marauders, they would have agents, commandos not being Force users, but having things like sniper rifles, explosives, bazookas, tanks, things like that. And, well, a Force user can, particularly a Dark Lord of the Sith, can deal with a lot of those things. Bane kind of figured out, well, if you get swarmed by like 30 mediocre Sith warriors, it doesn't matter how strong you are. They're going to bring you down. If you're on a ship and the ship gets blown up by another battleship, it doesn't matter how skilled you are in the Force, unless you're Darth Nihilus. You're going to die. So it's like there's that, and he's just kind of realized that you had these extremely powerful, talented Darksiders, but their power was not working. So he just said it's dysgenic. It favors people who can kind of mass a big enough following rather than raw knowledge and power. And he saw the Dark Brotherhood as kind of another example of that, as he saw that the Sith were all about natural selection, and then that would eventually make them strong enough to fight the Jedi. So his thought was, he kind of agreed with the Dark Brotherhood that the title Darth was inherently a challenge that challenged all other Darksiders to try to overthrow them and take the title for themselves. So he agreed that having Darth and having not having everyone as Dark Lord of the Sith would lead to infighting, but he viewed that as a good thing. The problem was, if there was infighting with a whole bunch of Sith, like I said, the issue would happen where you'd have the dysgenics of different Sith lords overthrowing each other using their power bases instead of in direct conflict. So what Bane came up with, and there was a couple different reasons for this, was the rule of two. There would only ever be two Sith, a master and apprentice, one to embody power, the other to crave it. And he sabotaged the Sith war effort and tricked them into using the thought bomb, which killed all other existing Sith. His apprentice, Darth Zana, was a Jedi Padawan who he took in under his wing and trained her in the rule of two and the ways of the Sith. So Bane's plan was every master would eventually try to find an apprentice strong enough to overthrow them. They would train their apprentice, and as they got older and their apprentice there was nothing left to teach them, their apprentice would kill their master, then take an apprentice in turn. Bane's thought process was that would ensure that every generation of Sith was more powerful than the previous one. Makes sense, because if you can defeat the other Sith, then that indicates that you're stronger or wiser or more cunning. Now, there was some big problems with this. One being, as in the case of Zana, it seemed like Bane got worried that she was just waiting for him to die. Because the dark side ravaged him, and by the time he was in his 40s or 50s, his body was basically falling apart. There was also that nonsense with the obelisk armor, but needless to say, Bane was in really bad shape. And he was worried that Zana was just going to wait out his death, which is cunning but doesn't show the traits that he necessarily wanted in a successor to the rule of two. He thought you had to best your master and prove you were better than them. So Bane eventually tried to find the secret of essence transfer so he could keep moving his consciousness between bodies. And his hope was not immortality, but to live long enough till he could find someone to defeat him. And ultimately he was happy when Zana proved able to kill him. So immediately after he died, it was interesting because Darth Cognos had shown up, and she had stated that she was willing to be the apprentice of whoever won the duel. So if Bane defeated Zana, he would have to find another apprentice, and he'd take Cognos. If Zana defeated Bane, she would need an apprentice, so she would take Cognos. So this kind of continued on for 1,000 years. The issue is it's hard to maintain discipline. Sith in general, from my understanding, hate Dark Jedi and non-Sith Darksiders because they view them as lacking in discipline. As egotistical and maniacal as Sith are, there is a sense of responsibility to the greater Sith order, to the point where the Sith Masters knowingly trained someone who they knew was going to kill them because they believed in the great work. Which is kind of an interesting duality to the Sith, is there is a small seed of collectivism in there you can see from time to time. Now, there was some other issues that happened. One of the problems with the rule of two, another one is there's only two Sith. I mean, you can say the Force would prevent it, but there's always a case that they're like both on a ship together. The power converter shorts out or something, and the ship explodes or it crashes or something, and then the Sith are all gone. So that's an issue. Another issue is you train an apprentice who isn't worthy to succeed you, and you don't have time to train another apprentice. So there is a lot of issues. But Bane's idea was, A, each generation would be stronger, and B, rather than the dark side being spread out through a whole bunch of different Dark Lords of the Sith, his metaphor was venom, where if you pour venom into too many cups of water, it loses its potency, but if you only put it into 1 cup of water, then it's maximally potent. So Darth Tenebris, who is Darth Plagueis' master, took the perspective that eventually there would be a Sith so powerful that he would end the rule of two and institute the rule of one. So Plagueis viewed it as the end of the rule of two because he was so skilled with midichlorians, and because the Sith had kind of gone from working entirely in the shadows to gaining political power and wealth with the aim of eventually taking over the Republic through more direct means. So Plagueis, through the midichlorian manipulation, believed that he was close to immortality. So his plan was to kind of end the rule of two and kind of make a new version of it, where he was going to find a confidant preferably a human, because human centrism is a really big thing. And they would rule the galaxy together. He would use midichlorian manipulation to ensure that they lived forever, and they would destroy the Jedi. And there's also kind of an aspect of it where, by this point in time, they were willing to, the various Sith were willing to take on additional apprentices that without the aim of making them future Dark Lords or making them kind of the same prestige. Like, Palpatine took on Darth Maul, who was pretty strong in the Force, but he deliberately didn't teach him a lot of things like Force lightning and higher Force abilities. But he trained him really heavily in direct combat and using the Force to enhance his already impressive physical abilities. So Maul proved to be a very good assassin. He was a good fighter who was Force trained and could take on Jedi. He was also kind of a convenient distraction. But Palpatine gave him the title of Darth, which Plagueis accepted. So you basically had 3 Sith Lords existing at the same time. Palpatine also took on Darth Tyrannus. I forget if he recruited him before or after Maul died. But the thing is, the rule of 2 was basically seen as being over. However, what wound up happening, and this is kind of part of the tragedy of Darth Plagueis, is he saw that once he was finished training Palpatine, because Palpatine was so immensely powerful and so skilled at politics, that he would teach Palpatine the secrets of immortality and they would rule the galaxy together forever. The issue is he didn't always invite Palpatine into his confidence. He said they were equals, but he still treated him as the junior of the pair. And Palpatine was immensely resentful of him. Also, Palpatine is a sociopath. Plagueis is not nearly as much of one. Plagueis is evil, but he's a lot more pragmatically evil, whereas Palpatine's a lot more sadistically and megalomaniacally evil. Plagueis isn't particularly megalomaniacal or sadistic. He's just kind of a cold, rational, methodical figure who wants to take over the galaxy, but is willing to be immensely patient and often kind of takes the perspective that you get more flies with honey than vinegar. So Palpatine, what he did was he eventually obviously killed Plagueis in his sleep. Plagueis hadn't slept, I think it was like 30 years or something. But he got him drunk, and when he passed out, he killed his master. So Palpatine basically had decided that there would be the rule of 1. That he would unlock the secrets of immortality, which he eventually did through essence transfer. See, Palpatine made like hundreds of clones of himself, and he had the way to make more. So when his body died, he would transfer into a new body. Now, the body's decayed after a decade or so because the dark side, his power was so immense. I'm pretty sure it's canon that Palpatine is the strongest Sith in history. Whether or not he's stronger than Valkorion, I'm not sure. The Sith Emperor's power was incomprehensible, but it wasn't direct per se. Like, I don't think you could bear it in the same way, bear it all directly. Like, he could consume planets, but a lot of that required immense preparation and other Darksiders helping him out. He can't just do that in direct combat. So Palpatine's power was such that it would rapidly decay the body, which would die after a decade or so. But he had hundreds of them, and he could make more. So he had enough clones that he could basically live forever. So he had Vader, but to a certain extent, he never saw Vader as a successor. Part of why he kept him around was because Anakin had that childhood connection and was fairly loyal to Palpatine, and to a certain extent wasn't interested in overthrowing him, nor really thought that he could overthrow him. And the couple times he did, Palpatine was able to stop him, like with Galen Merrick, etc. So I don't think Palpatine ever viewed Vader as necessarily overthrowing him. Whether or not he was going to take on another apprentice, I'm not really sure. Vader was kind of an exception. I think his ultimate goal was to have a lot of Emperor's hands or Darksiders that he would use as his agents, but I don't think he ever really intended to take on other Sith. That he would ensure that all the Jedi were killed and that there would be his dark side or adepts, but that no one approaching his power would ever exist, and that he would rule forever as the eternal emperor of the galaxy. So that was kind of the end of the rule of two. After Palpatine died, there was a Sith named Lemua. It's like Ly Lemua. Lemia, however you pronounce it, who was one of Vader's former apprentices, and she took the title Dark Lady of the Sith and tried to resurrect a rule of two Sith order. However, she was ultimately killed, and with her died the rule of two. Eventually, what would happen is we'd have Darth Krayt, about 100 years or so later, who would institute a different rule of one, in which there would only be one master and many Sith, but the Sith would be slaves to the master. And the Sith order would be embodied in one person, which was kind of a combination of kind of the Dark Brotherhood idea of collectivism, at the same time having the Palpatine's rule of one. So another kind of issue with the rule of two is it was very prone to the individual personalities to determine the inertia. There was one Sith Lord, Darth Gravid, who felt that the dark side was bad and that the Sith should keep a lot of aspects of their philosophy but become lightsiders. So he burned a lot of the more disturbing aspects of the Sith knowledge. So he burned like essence transfer and a lot of things like that, which put them back a lot. But every rule of two Sith could take on numerous Jedi. It's my view that Sith are generally a lot stronger than Jedi on average. Like if you pit an average Sith warrior against the average Jedi Knight, or the average Sith Lord against the average Jedi Master, they would utterly destroy them, and you can kind of see this in the games like the Old Republic. And I think the reason for that is the dark side is stronger than the light side, but it rapidly decays your mental and physical body. So it's a Faustian bargain. Also, it makes you impulsive, and it gives you a lot more weaknesses than the light side does in exchange for immense power. Also, because the Sith practice natural selection, the candidates who survive are just naturally better than, because the Jedi accept everybody. Granted, the Jedi have by a huge numerical advantage, but the Sith prefer quality over quantity, even back during the days of the old Empire. The rule of two Sith were also a lot more practical, because during the Sith empires, basically the Sith Lords ruled as kind of a magocracy or priestly caste, and they just screwed everything up with their power games and their esoteric nonsense, and they worked the best when they just let the Moffs run things and do the military campaigns, because they actually knew what they were doing. But they were largely dead weight outside of combat during the old Sith Empire. So that's my attempt to explain the rule of two, kind of the philosophy and the ideas behind it, how it kind of shaped the Sith Order in the galaxy, and what kind of came before and after it. So I think it's one of the a very interesting concept within Star Wars, and it's something I wish they'd explored a bit more in the movies. If you want to know more about this, I cannot recommend highly enough Darth Plagueis, one of the best novels ever written in my opinion, and the Bane trilogy, particularly the first and the last book, really kind of go into Bane's psychology and what he was thinking when he made the rule of two. Also, the Dark Brotherhood is fun. It's kind of awesomely lame. I mean, they're called the Dark Brotherhood for crying out loud. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys later. More videos to come.